This is the standard Washal Urinal, introduced around the 1930s and would be made up until 1962 when it would be replaced with the American Standard Washbrook urinal. This urinal would be the perfect start of reviewing some classical washdown urinals from the early to mid-1900s, but how well has it held up? Let's find out. I gotta say, you can't go wrong with this classic overall design. It really screams vintage. I like how it looks. It's very classical for its time. As you can see, it has a hold strainer and a total of 10 holes, 4 on the bottom and 6 on the top, as well as a bump that protrudes out from the urinal. You can also see where the water rests as well. It also has a bunch of rim jets as well, which is a good sign. Let's have a look at a flush. Yeah, pretty standard. Let's have a look at bowl rinse. Honestly, for the most part, it's pretty great. I did notice that this hole towards the back here and this hole right here were lacking some water. It may just be pressure dependent, or maybe the distribution was not the greatest, but still, for the most part, it's pretty great at rinsing. The functionality and durability of this urinal is pretty decent. Compared to something like the American Standard Washbrook urinals, all generations might I add, it holds up fairly well and is rarely out of order. Just shows you how strong these urinals were back in the day. While I definitely think there were better washdowns from the time, this holds up pretty well. And that is the standard Washal Urinal. You just can't go wrong with a classic. I miss this style of urinal. Even though it's just a washdown urinal, it's still kind of boring compared to something like the Cassell or Alta. It still holds up pretty well. It's a pretty good urinal for a washdown. But now, let's put this urinal onto the grading scale. Let's grade it.
Come on, you can't complain about this overall design. It's such a classical design and I love it so much. You just can't go wrong with this nice design. It gets an 8. Yep, it's a washdown flush. What do you expect? Even for a classical urinal like this, it's still boring. The flush gets a 5. The bowl rinse is almost near excellence. However, there seems to be some corner jets that seem to be missing some rinse. This also really depends on the pressure as well. Though you could argue that there's also a lot of rim jets that it has to feed through, so that could also be part of the blame. It may not be a 10, but it's definitely a 9. I gotta say, the functionality of these urinals are super solid. I mean, compare this to a lot of urinals made in the 1960s onwards, and the difference is just night and day. A lot of classical urinals like the Standard Washal were built with so much care and durability. I mean, seriously, compare this urinal to literally every generation of American Standard Washbrook urinal made, and it doesn't even compare. It's so much better. Sure, you can argue some factors may affect this urinal, like buildup and of course improper care and pressure. But even in those scenarios, it's still a lot more durable than literally every generation of Washbrook. Not to mention that it still functions a lot better in those situations than literally every other washdown urinal made from the 1960s onwards. Is it a perfect washdown? No. But it's definitely a super solid urinal for its time. I give it a 7. Now let's talk about the overall value of this urinal. Listen guys, even though this is a washdown urinal, it's such a classic and you just can't go wrong with this urinal. From its classical design to its great bowl rinse and decent survivability and functionality, there's not a lot you can complain about this urinal. Yeah, sure, it's a washdown urinal, and comparing this to the Cassell and Alta, I'd rather take those in terms of interest factor, but still, it's a super solid urinal and you can't go wrong with a classic design like this. They just don't make them like they used to anymore. The value is a 7. The final score of the standard Washal Urinal is a 36 out of 50, which translates to a 72 out of 100. Man, they don't make them like they used to anymore, don't they? Ever since the 1960s, washdown urinals were on a steady decline. And sometimes it's hard to remember what washdown urinals used to be. But at least you can go back to a urinal like this and see what washdown urinals once were. Super solid urinals that were built to last. If only considered for most washdown urinals nowadays.